Welcome back everyone. In today's lesson we're going to cover how to use the queen. So the queen is the most powerful piece on the chessboard, so knowing how to use her properly is going to skyrocket your chess abilities. We're going to cover this in three parts: how to use the queen in the opening, in the middle game, and in the end game, because they're all different. And as always, this video is packed with examples so that we can cover a lot of situations and you can apply them to your games. Last but not least, my name's Philip and I make these videos to help you guys improve at chess. I'm a 2100 FIDE rated player from New Zealand. So if you like this content, consider subscribing, and see you in the next video as well. So let's get into it. First thing we're going to cover is the opening. Principle number one is do not move the queen multiple times in the opening. The queen is the most powerful piece, which by nature means she can be attacked by any piece and has to move. So in the opening, what you're trying to do is you're trying to control the center and trying to get your pieces out and get your king to safety. This is the Scandinavian defense where black plays d5. But you can kind of see if black isn't careful, if black just starts moving the queen around too many times and not focusing on getting his pieces out, you kind of get stuck in this position where white has a lot of pieces out already and a strong advantage, and black has just the queen out, and the queen's just going to continue getting attacked. Queen g6, bishop h5. My board's a little bit laggy, please bear with me. Bishop takes here, and black is really in a horrible position. This is not a good position for black. Black's position's already fallen apart. So principle number one, do not move the queen multiple times. Try to avoid that. If you end up moving the queen multiple times, you probably have done something wrong somewhere, so just be careful, get the queen to safety and get your pieces out. Number two for the opening is, what are the key squares for the queen? So I'm just going to give you the answer right now. The c2 square is one of those rules of thumb where if you put your queen on c2 or c7 as black, you almost cannot go wrong. That is a very safe square for the queen, and in almost every opening, it's a very solid square for the queen until probably like move 15 or 20 when you get into the middle game. The reason is, let's take a look at this position. This is a classic position where you've got a d4, d5 type of pawn structure. This is a semi-Slav defense on the queen's gambit declined. So where can white move the queen? Well, the main squares would be, in a typical opening, e2, d2, and c2. d3 is not a good square because that's usually reserved for the bishop to come out. b3 is playable, but you want to have that option of moving the pawn to b3, or maybe a3 and b4. So queen to b3 is playable, but it's not necessarily always the strongest. e2 obviously blocks the bishop from coming out. You can move the queen to e2 after moving the bishop out, so bishop to d3 and then queen to e2. And then queen to d2 doesn't really work too well in this position because it blocks the knight and the bishop. So by process of elimination, queen c2 is actually 9 times out of 10 a very solid square for the queen in the opening. And so if there's one rule of thumb that you can probably rely on for most of your games, is if you get stuck and you don't want to calculate too much, just put the queen on c2, you're going to be safe. It's a very strong square for the queen, and it's going to open up a whole bunch of options in the middle game. Okay, so let's go to a middle game situation now. In this case, you can see black has their queen on c7 and white has their queen on e2. This is an early type of middle game where both sides have got their pieces out, got their king to safety. They have some control of the center. They're playing for the center. How the middle game evolves is usually you want to have a plan where you're expanding your control of the center, gaining space, putting your pieces onto stronger squares and applying pressure to your opponent. In the early stages of the middle game, the queen doesn't play too much of a role. The queen usually sits on that c7, c2, e2 square that you brought her out on initially, and you're pretty much trying to get your other pieces out. And as we see in this example, we're going to play through it. As the middle game progresses, your queen is going to have more and more of an influence, generally, in the chess game. So watch the queens in this game, and watch how, as the pieces start getting traded off, as the pawn structure changes, there's going to be more opportunity for both sides' queens to go to stronger squares, centralize themselves a bit more. So in this case, let's just play a sample set of lines. So white's vying for an f4, an e5 push. Black is playing for pressure on that d file. And you can kind of see the queens shuffle around a little bit, but they don't really have too much influence. The queen starts getting into an open position now. And as you kind of see, as the middle game progresses, both sides' queens centralize themselves naturally a little bit more. So in this case, the queen, if the queen was still on c7, still a good place, but it's not being so influential. On d5, it's a strong square for the queen. It can't really be kicked out. Maybe knight c3 could kick it out, but black's always got many squares for his queen, and white also has many squares on the board for their queen. So as the middle game develops, you want to keep an eye on how much influence your queen is applying in relation to your plan, but your main plan should be centered around gaining space, putting pressure, opening attacking lines. Like you can see white's pieces are strong. White has a strong pawn in the center. The pieces are pretty centralized. The rooks are on strong files, and the queen's playing a supporting influential role here. Now, one more middle game example, and this is a famous game between two former world champions. I think this was played in 1938, I believe, between Mikhail Botvinnik and Jose Capablanca. So two absolute legends of the game. If we just play through the game, I just want you guys to keep your eyes out on where the queens are throughout the game, and you'll see how the world champions sort of play the game, where they, here's the opening. This is, again, d4, d5 type of structure, Nimzo-Indian defense. And here, look at the square Black puts his queen on. Capablanca puts it on d7 in this case, but again, c7 probably blocks the option of that knight dropping back to c7 and then e6. And e7, that's also possible, but that takes the eye off the d5 square if white starts to trade things off. So d7 is a good square. It has influence on these light squares. So for instance, if white wanted to put a knight there, the queen controls that f5 square. Not to go into too much depth, just keep an eye on the queens. d3 by Botvinnik, and then it drops to c2. Again, it's just a good safe square for the queen, and it usually is always the right answer, 9 times out of 10. So the middle game progresses. Now, like we said, early middle game, there's not much movement of the queens. The queens sort of stay in their positions while the other pieces fight for space and central control and maneuvering. So here white is applying pressure in the center. And from here, white continues the pressure, f4, f5. Pieces get traded off. And as more pieces get traded off, as the game develops, look at how much of a different role the queens play here. Now the queen for white is centralized. Black somewhere went wrong, and so now is on the defensive. The queen is on e8. There's a beautiful bishop sacrifice here by white, which is sort of like the brilliancy of the game. And you can see how influential that queen is here. And after a few checks, excuse the laggy nature of the display here, but you can kind of see it doesn't take away from the beauty of the game. After a bit of maneuvering, I'll just fast forward that, check, 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 as Hikaru would say. Here, after king h5, black resigned, and just take a look at the position. The queens had a bigger influence in the middle game as the middle game went on. So remember that. Do not try to get out of the opening or from the opening or early middle game, try to influence with your queen too much. The queen plays a supporting role. As the game develops, that's when the queen is a much more influential piece as things get traded, as the pawn structure changes. So now we're going to go into endgames, the final thing. Endgames are very complicated, and there's so much to cover. So we're just going to go over probably the most important principle in an endgame where you've got queens, which is look for the long range moves. By nature of an endgame, the board is quite open, there's fewer pieces, many squares are available for all pieces, and since the queens are there, you want to look for the long range moves. So for instance, if you're black here, you're looking for check on a1, followed by taking the pawn on a4. You're looking for maybe queen coming here, check. You're looking for queen a6, maneuvers down to c7, picking up this pawn. Both sides, in this case, it's a pretty even position. The computer gives it a 0.4 advantage for white, but both sides are going to be trying to promote. Whoever is quicker wins in this position. And likewise, if white can do a series of checks and then collect that pawn at the end of it, that's the type of stuff you want to be looking for. Long range movements, queen a5, queen h5, queen d1 if that queen is not defending the d5 square. From a5, queen e1, maybe dropping back if the knight moves. There's so many long range moves, you want to keep your eyes out for them. So don't think about, whereas in a middle game you're trying to maneuver the queen maybe from, let's say, e5 to g5 or to h5 or little things like that, or to c5. In an endgame, and especially as more and more pieces get traded, especially as the knights come off the board, it's the long range moves that you want to look out for, because they are going to make or break your position. You're either going to win a piece, win a pawn, or lose a pawn, or lose a piece, and therefore the game. So keep your eyes out for those long range moves. So that's a bit of an overview of how to use the queen in the opening, middle game, and endgame. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you want to see more content like this to help you improve your game, consider subscribing to my channel. Obviously, like, comment, all that good stuff. It helps the algorithm see that you guys enjoy the video, and